When my father-in-law passed away, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. He wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of man who carried an aura of power wherever he went. People called him the last old lion, and honestly, it fit. His fortune was rumored to be as vast as his influence. I had married into his family, but never fully belonged. My wife, Clara, often told me not to mind the sideways glances at family dinners, or the way her older brothers dismissed my every opinion. I was the outsider, the schoolteacher who didn't match their high-powered careers in finance, law, or business. I thought I had made peace with that role, quietly supportive, invisible on the edges of their glittering lives. But nothing prepared me for the day of the will reading. The mahogany-paneled office was thick with perfume, cologne, and the brittle tension of relatives who had waited their entire lives for this moment. I sat toward the back, half expecting someone to ask why I was even there. And sure enough, a cousin leaned toward me with a smirk and whispered, "Don't take it personally. You were never meant to be part of this. Mistakes don't make it into wills." That word, mistake, hit like a slap. I clenched my hands, trying not to show it bothered me. I told myself I was here for Clara, nothing more. The estate, the legacy, all of it was theirs to squabble over. I had no claim, no reason to expect anything but awkward silence. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, shuffled the papers, and began to read. The list of bequests unfolded predictably. Houses, businesses, trust funds. Names I knew well. Names that belonged. And then mine. My name, spoken out loud, echoing in that grand room like a stone dropped into still water. Every head turned. Some in disbelief, others in scorn. My wife gasped softly beside me, her hand tightening around mine. I had been called a mistake. But in that moment, the will itself suggested otherwise. And I couldn't shake the feeling that my father-in-law, cryptic, cunning man that he was, had just set a trap, and I was standing at the center of it. Because sometimes an inheritance isn't a gift. It's a test. And the only thing I knew for certain was that my life would never be the same after hearing my name read aloud. The silence after my name was read stretched too long, too heavy. I felt the heat of every stare pressing against my back like a judgment I hadn't prepared for. The lawyer, a meticulous man named Mr. Whitmore, with rimless glasses and a voice like sandpaper, didn't flinch. He simply continued reading, as though including me were the most natural thing in the world. But for everyone else in that oak-paneled room, it was anything but natural. Clara's eldest brother, Richard, shifted in his chair. He was the kind of man who always looked like he was about to close a deal, even in mourning. "Excuse me," he interrupted sharply. "Could you repeat that?" "Mr." Whitmore adjusted his glasses and read again, slow and deliberate. "To my son-in-law, Daniel." There it was. My name, carved into the record. A ripple of whispers moved across the room. Someone coughed. Another relative chuckled bitterly under their breath. Richard's jaw tightened, and his sister, Evelyn, shook her head as if she'd just heard a bad joke. I wanted to shrink into the chair, but Clara's grip on my hand kept me grounded. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, wide, searching, told me she was as stunned as everyone else. I tried to breathe, to remind myself this wasn't about me. Whatever my father-in-law had left me, if anything at all, it couldn't compare to the vast properties, the controlling shares, the legacy he had entrusted to his bloodline. But then I remembered the last time I'd spoken to him, months before he grew frail. We had sat together in the garden, and he had told me in his gruff way that he liked how I didn't perform. He said, "Most men want to impress me. You just shared your sandwich." I hadn't thought much of it then. Just an odd compliment from a man who rarely handed them out. But now, it felt like foreshadowing. The reading moved on, but the atmosphere had changed. Every mention of my name, there were several, tightened the room like a vice. By the end, I wasn't just included. I was central, and that made me dangerous in their eyes. Because in families like this, inheritance isn't only about money. It's about power. And I had just been handed a seat at the table. When the reading concluded, the room erupted, not with applause or gratitude, but with outrage. Richard was the first to stand, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "This is absurd. My father must have been confused near the end. Daniel doesn't belong in this." His voice thundered across the room, and several relatives nodded, emboldened by his indignation. Mr. Whitmore remained calm, folding his hands neatly over the papers. I can assure you, Mr. Lawrence, your father was of sound mind. These instructions were written and sealed long before his final illness. The terms are clear. The terms. That was when I learned what, exactly, had been left to me. Not a sum of money, not a piece of land or an estate. It was a key. Mr. Whitmore slid a small, ornate brass key across the table toward me. Its head was shaped like a lion's face, fitting, given the nickname everyone used for my father-in-law. It was heavier than I expected when I picked it up, cool in my palm. I turned it over, baffled. "What does it open?" I asked. Mr. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. "The letter explains," he said, producing a sealed envelope with my name in the patriarch's bold, slanted handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. The message inside was short, almost cryptic. "Daniel, if you are reading this, it means I have trusted you with what others would squander. This key belongs to the cottage on the north edge of my property. Go there alone. Spend 3 nights. Do not invite anyone in, no matter the circumstance. When you leave, you will understand what is yours and why. Fail to honor this, and your share dissolves." That was it. No explanation of what waited inside the cottage. No hint of why he had chosen me for this strange task. The family erupted again, their anger louder now. Evelyn laughed harshly. 3 nights in some drafty shack? That's not an inheritance. That's humiliation. But beneath the scorn, I sensed fear. None of them knew what the cottage represented. None of them could stand the idea that the outsider might hold the thread that unraveled the whole tapestry of their inheritance. Clara squeezed my hand under the table. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "Don't back down." And I realized then, this wasn't just a bizarre request. It was a test of patience, of faith, maybe of character itself. I looked again at the key, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. For the first time, I wondered if I was ready to unlock whatever secrets my father-in-law had hidden for me. The following evening, I drove out to the far northern edge of the estate. Clara wanted to come with me, but the letter's warning rang too clear. Go there alone. Do not invite anyone in. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her eyes full of questions she didn't ask, and I promised to call each morning. The road narrowed as I left the main grounds behind. The mansion, with its manicured gardens and fountains, shrank in the rearview mirror until only fields and crooked fences stretched ahead. Finally, after several miles, the trees parted, and I saw it. The cottage was nothing like the family's opulence. Small, weathered stone walls, ivy climbing the chimney, a porch with 2 rocking chairs that looked ready to crumble. It felt forgotten. And yet, as I pulled up, I had the sense it was waiting for me. The key slid easily into the lock. The door creaked open, releasing a faint smell of cedar and old books. Inside, the air was cool and still. The first night was uneventful. I explored cautiously, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen with cast-iron pans, a sitting room lined with shelves. But I noticed details that didn't fit the neglect. A firewood pile neatly stacked, a kettle polished to a shine, a scarf folded on the armchair, as if someone had set it down moments ago. That scarf caught my eye. Blue wool, worn but cared for. Something about it stirred a memory. Years ago, I'd seen my father-in-law wear one just like it when he walked the grounds in winter. I draped it around my neck, oddly comforted, and promised myself I'd return it before leaving. The puzzles began the second night. On the dining table, I found a journal. At first I thought it was blank, but under candlelight, faint words appeared, ink faded with time. They were notes in my father-in-law's hand, short entries about trust, loyalty, the dangers of greed. And one repeating line, "He who shares, inherits." It made little sense, but I felt the weight of it. Then, just past midnight, there was a knock at the door. A sharp, insistent rapping that cut through the silence. I froze. The letter's warning pulsed in my mind. Do not invite anyone in, no matter the circumstance. I didn't move. After a minute, the knocking stopped. But as I leaned against the door, heart racing, I heard it. Faint footsteps retreating into the dark. By the third night, I barely slept. The journal's entries became clearer the longer I read, as if the ink wanted to be seen. I pieced together a kind of lesson. My father-in-law had been testing people his whole life, watching how they treated others when no one was looking. He seemed convinced that true character revealed itself in the smallest acts, sharing a meal, offering kindness to someone with nothing to give back. And there, on the final page, a name. My name, written boldly, as though he had known this moment would come. The scarf slipped from my shoulders as I stared at it, trembling. Whatever he had hidden for me in this cottage, it wasn't just an inheritance. It was a verdict. On the morning after the third night, I woke to find sunlight spilling across the wooden floorboards. For the first time since arriving, the cottage felt warm, almost alive. I brewed tea in the little kettle, and as I poured, I noticed something new on the table. The journal, which I had left closed the night before, now lay open to a page I was certain hadn't existed before. The ink was dark, fresh. My father-in-law's unmistakable script filled the page. If you are still here, Daniel, you have obeyed. Many would not. They would open the door to temptation. You did not. Now, open the trunk. My eyes darted around the room. A trunk? I hadn't seen one. But when I pushed the rocking chair aside, I noticed grooves in the floor. Kneeling down, I tugged at the loose planks, and sure enough, there it was, a heavy oak trunk with iron latches hidden beneath the boards. My hands shook as I fit the lion-headed key into the lock. It clicked with a weighty finality, as if sealing a covenant. Inside, I didn't find gold or jewels or deeds to properties. Instead, I found scraps, letters bundled with twine, old photographs, a pair of cracked reading glasses, relics of a life. His life. I sat there for hours, reading. Letters he had written but never sent, to his children, to Clara, even to me. In one, he confessed regret over the harshness with which he had raised his children, saying, "I taught them to win, but I did not teach them to care." In another, he wrote about the loneliness of success, and tucked near the bottom was a single envelope with my name. Inside, the message was simple, but it struck me deeper than anything else. Daniel, I saw in you what I failed to instill in my own. You shared a sandwich with a man who had nothing, and you didn't know I was watching. You treated me as a man, not as a lion. That is why the true inheritance is yours to guard. I sank back, breathless. The scarf I'd found felt suddenly heavier around my shoulders, as though it weren't just fabric, but a mantle passed on. And then, beneath the letters, I uncovered something else. A sealed envelope addressed to Mr. Whitmore, the lawyer. Across its front, in bold strokes, were the words, "To be opened only after Daniel has completed the 3 nights." I realized then that this wasn't over. The cottage had been a trial, but the real storm would be outside, with the family. They would not accept this. Not easily. And I understood with icy clarity. My father-in-law had not just left me an inheritance. He had left me a battle. The morning I left the cottage, I carried the trunk with me. It wasn't heavy in weight, but in meaning, it felt like a burden of stone. I returned to the main estate, where the lawyer and the family waited in the grand parlor. The moment I stepped through the door, conversation froze. All eyes turned to the trunk in my arms. Evelyn's lips twisted into a sneer. Richard didn't bother hiding his fury. "You think you can just waltz back in here," he spat, "with some box of junk and claim father chose you over his own blood?" I set the trunk gently on the table. Mr. Whitmore raised a hand for silence, then took the sealed envelope I had carried from the cottage. His expression grew grave as he slid it open and began to read. The room held its breath. "To my family, if you are hearing this, it means Daniel has completed the 3 nights. That alone speaks louder than your objections. The trunk contains the essence of what I value most, my lessons, my regrets, my hopes. It is not money, for money is too easily squandered. It is my trust, and Daniel is the guardian of it." Gasps, mutters, and one outright shout of protest filled the air. Clara slipped her arm around mine, her touch steady, but I could feel her pulse racing. Richard slammed a fist on the table. "This is manipulation. Father knew he was dying, and he planted this nonsense to spite us." But Mr. Whitmore continued reading, unfazed. "Daniel is to have stewardship over the foundation that bears my name. He will decide how its resources are used to help others. None of you are disinherited. Your shares remain. But the legacy, the heart, rests with him. The foundation. It was worth millions, maybe more. But more than that, it was power. Power over how the family name would be remembered." The room erupted. Evelyn accused me of trickery. Richard demanded proof I had stayed the full 3 nights. A cousin hissed that I was nothing more than a charity case elevated out of pity. I tried to speak, but my words drowned under theirs. The scarf around my neck felt suddenly like a shield, reminding me of the quiet strength my father-in-law must have seen. Mr. Whitmore raised his voice above the chaos. The instructions are binding. Contest them if you wish, but you will lose. The patriarch was meticulous. That silenced them, but only for a moment. I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't finished. They would fight me, not in the courts, but in whispers, in cold shoulders, in subtle sabotage. And yet, as I looked at Clara beside me, her hand steady on mine, I knew one thing. I had been tested, and I had not broken. But the storm was only gathering. The storm broke a week later. At first, things were merely tense. Family dinners turned icy. Invitations forgot to include Clara and me. But I could endure cold shoulders. What I didn't expect was Richard's next move. He called a meeting of the Foundation's board, summoning me as though I were a trespasser instead of its newly appointed steward. The boardroom was vast, glass walls overlooking the city skyline. Every chair was filled with men and women who had worked under my father-in-law for decades. Most had known me only as the quiet son-in-law on the margins. Richard wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pacing like a prosecutor. "We all respected my father, but I think we can agree his final decision was uncharacteristic. Entrusting the foundation to Daniel, a man with no business experience, no stake in the company, no blood relation, it undermines everything my father built." Murmurs rippled around the table. I felt the scarf on my shoulders, grounding me. I stood, heart pounding. "With respect, Richard, your father didn't build this foundation to grow the family fortune. He built it to give back. He knew wealth without compassion rots from the inside out. And he chose me because he saw I understood that." Richard smirked. "A nice speech. But can you prove it?" That's when he revealed his trap. He slid a photograph across the table of the cottage. A private investigator had taken it. In the image, blurred but visible, was a figure at the door. "You broke the rule," Richard said, triumph in his voice. "Someone visited you. You let them in." Gasps circled the table. I felt my stomach drop. Then I looked closer. The figure wasn't inside. They stood on the porch, head bowed, holding something in their hands. And suddenly, I remembered. The second night, the knock on the door. The footsteps retreating. They hadn't come to test me. They had come to leave something. I reached into my bag and pulled it out. The sandwich, wrapped in wax paper, that I had found on the porch the next morning. I had nearly forgotten about it, but I'd kept it, unsure why. Holding it up, I said, "This is what they left. Food. A gift." I didn't open the door. I didn't break the rule. And you know what? I think Father expected this too. He believed kindness comes in small acts, like a sandwich shared. The room fell silent. Mr. Whitmore leaned forward, eyes sharp. The rules were not broken. The patriarch's words are clear. Daniel remains steward. Richard's face darkened. His jaw clenched so tight, I thought it might crack. For the first time, he looked less like a victor and more like a man cornered by truth. But I knew this battle wasn't just about legalities. It was about dignity, about proving I wasn't the mistake they'd branded me. And in that moment, I realized the real confrontation wasn't with Richard or Evelyn or the board. It was with the very legacy of the man who had orchestrated all of this, my father-in-law, the Lion. The boardroom battle left Richard seething, but I sensed it wasn't the end. He had too much pride, too much need to be the center of his father's legacy, to let go quietly. A few nights later, Clara and I were back at the mansion for what was supposed to be a family reconciliation dinner. It was tense, of course. Evelyn barely looked at me. Richard spoke in clipped sentences, and the others seemed to be waiting for a spark to ignite the powder keg. After dessert, Richard finally stood. "If Father really trusted you, Daniel, then you won't mind showing us what's in that trunk. Open it here, in front of everyone." The challenge was obvious. He wanted to expose me, to make the contents look trivial, laughable, compared to the fortune they all craved. Clara glanced at me, worry in her eyes. I took a breath, tightened the scarf around my neck, and nodded. Fine. Mr. Whitmore had anticipated something like this. He had the trunk brought from his office, where I'd asked him to keep it safe. The family gathered in a semicircle, their faces a mix of skepticism and hunger. I lifted the lid. The letters, photographs, and mementos were just as I'd found them in the cottage. Gasps of disappointment slipped from lips expecting gold. Richard laughed bitterly. So this is it. A box of junk? That's what you risked everything for. But then I pulled out one particular envelope. It was marked, "To my children." I unfolded the paper and began to read aloud. My father-in-law's voice seemed to fill the room through his words. "I know you expected riches. You have them already. What you lack, and what I failed to teach you, is humility." I tested Daniel because he did not hunger for wealth. He treated me as a man, not a king. I trust him to remind you what truly matters: family, kindness, and the courage to live without arrogance. If you cannot honor that, then you will lose more than money. You will lose yourselves. The room was silent. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. Even Richard, red-faced and trembling, couldn't speak for once. I set the letter down gently. This was his legacy. Not the money, not the houses, the lesson. He left me to guard it, but it's meant for all of us. No one replied. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I wasn't fighting for a place anymore. The place had been given, sealed in his own words. Whether they accepted it or not, I had become the steward, not just of a foundation, but of a truth my father-in-law had hidden in plain sight all along. That night, as Clara and I left the mansion, she slipped her arm through mine and whispered, "He saw you better than any of them ever did." And I realized she was right. The lion had roared one last time, not to declare his power, but to pass it on in a quieter, humbler form. Months have passed since that night in the mansion. Life hasn't become easier. Richard still keeps his distance, and Evelyn wavers between resentment and reluctant respect. But something has shifted. The board of the foundation has warmed to me, slowly, cautiously, as they've watched me honor the mission my father-in-law envisioned. We've funded scholarships for underprivileged kids. We've restored community centers in neighborhoods the family once ignored. Each decision feels like carrying forward not his wealth, but his wisdom. And each time I wrap that old blue scarf around my neck on crisp mornings, I remember the cottage, the journal, the key, and the simple words: "He who shares, inherits." Clara often tells me her father was never a man of gentle words, but he had a way of speaking through action. I believe this was his final act, not to divide his children from me, but to give them a mirror and me a mantle. Whether they accept that mirror or not is their choice. My task is to keep walking forward with it. Sometimes I still hear whispers in town that I was the mistake, the outsider, the lucky son-in-law who stumbled into fortune. But those whispers don't sting anymore, because I know the truth. I know the man who wore the lion's scarf didn't make mistakes. He made tests. And for once, I passed. So when people ask me what it felt like to hear my name called out at the will reading, I smile. It felt like stepping into fire, yes, but also like stepping into light. Because at the end of it all, inheritance isn't about what we get. It's about what we're trusted to give. And that is a gift worth more than all the riches in the world.